Okay, good morning and welcome to the Economy and Fair Work Committee's 33rd meeting of 2024. Our first item of business is a decision to take items 5 and 7, which is discussion of the evidence heard and our work programme in private. Are members content to take these items in private? Yeah, okay, thank you. Our next item of business is consideration of an SSI. The committee is invited to note the Public Procurement Miscellaneous Amendment Scotland Regulations 2024. The instrument makes minor procedural amendments to the rules governing contracts following the UK's membership of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership and its trade agreement with Australia. It also makes similar amendments to the rules governing lower value domestically regulated contracts and makes technical amendments to the procurement regulations to comply with Section 2 of the retained EU Law Revocation and Reform Act 2023. Having read the SSI, can I ask if members are happy at this stage to note the instrument? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, our next item of business is consideration of a legislative consent memorandum on the Product Regulation and Metrology Bill. Can I welcome our panel for this item, which is Richard Lochhead, the Minister for Business, Ewan Page, Head of UK Frameworks, and Peter van de Graaf, Head of International Trade Flows and Regulations in the Scottish Government. And can I also, we're going to invite the Minister to make a brief statement, but also encourage members when we do open it up to discussion and our panel. And I failed miserably to achieve this last week, but to keep your questions and hopefully answers relatively brief. But over to yourself, Minister.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning to the committee. Nice to be before you all this morning, first time in a while. And thank you, Convener, and also to the committee for giving me the opportunity today to outline the Scottish Government's current position on the Product Regulation and Metrology Bill. As the metrology aspects of the bill are reserved and not covered by the LCM, as you can expect, I'll be focusing on what I say on the product regulations elements. The UK Government has said that the creation of broad powers to regulate product characteristics as proposed by the bill are necessary to fill the regulatory gap caused by the EU exit. Unfortunately, so far, the approach taken in the draft bill has not respected the devolution settlement and the legislative competence of this Parliament. For instance, exceptions to the Product Safety Reservation in the Scotland Act have not been adequately recognised. This means that some devolved product categories would fall unnecessarily within scope of the bill. Similarly, the bill grants regulatory powers to the UK ministers in relation to the efficiency and effectiveness and the environmental impact of products. These are matters which are largely devolved. Yet the bill does not currently contain any mechanism to prevent UK ministers from using these powers in devolved areas without the consent of Scottish ministers and oversight by the Scottish Parliament. So that's why we've recommended that the Scottish Parliament does not grant legislative consent for the bill at this time. The Scottish Government believes that regulatory requirements for products in the UK should align with those of the EU, and the British Chamber of Commerce, for instance, has recently called for, I quote, as much alignment as possible. So this would help to facilitate trade with our most important trading partner. The UK Government has announced plans to align with some specific EU product regulatory changes, so that's to be welcomed. Whilst the environmental power in the bill is limited to alignment with EU law, the other powers can be used to either align or diverge. UK ministers have stated that they want to keep both options open, although there are nods to alignment elsewhere in the bill. The impact of the bill on wider EU alignment at UK level remains therefore unclear. As a result, its impact in the UK internal market also remains uncertain. Despite gaps in the policy background, we are continuing to engage positively and constructively with the UK Government. Indeed, I'm pleased to say that the committee that the UK Government has now agreed with our view that the Clause 7 that covers devolved matters and requires legislative consent. So we are hopeful to reach further agreement also on other issues within the bill. This may eventually allow us to change our advice to you on consent. So thank you again for inviting me along today, and of course I'll do my best to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. I can open up to members' questions, starting with Murdo Fraser.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, Minister and colleagues. Thank you for setting out in your opening statement your view on the LCM. I think it's fair to say the advice we've had from SPICE, who advised the committee, is that this is an area where lines between what is devolved and what is reserved are quite blurry, and it's quite difficult to distinguish between what might be a reserved competence and what might be devolved competence in this particular area. For example, regulations covering technical standards for products would be reserved, but regulations relating to efficiency and effectiveness might not be. And it's difficult, perhaps, to distinguish between these two. I think it would be really helpful to the committee if you or your officials could perhaps give us some examples in a practical sense of areas where a conflict might arise, if you're able to do that, which might better explain your hesitancy around granting consent.
Thank you. So it kind of gets to the crux of the issue. And clearly, in terms of this bill, it's an enabling bill. So a lot of these questions will only be answered once the UK government takes a decision of how to use these enabling powers and brings forward the secondary legislation, and then we'd have to look at each individual case. And that would be when we'd have to take a view on the questions that Murdo Fraser asks. In the wider sense, of course, one of our key concerns is the mismatch between what's devolved under the Scotland Act and what's excluded under this Act by the UK government. So you've got two lists and they do not match. So clearly, we would like to see what's devolved, according to the Scotland Act, replicated in this bill's exclusions from their Act. And that would therefore be a clear match. And that's what we're pursuing. There are a number of devolved issues in this area, under food agriculture, horticultural products, fish and fish products, seeds, animal feeding stuffs, fertilisers and pesticides. These are the kind of areas under the Scotland Act are devolved, and clearly we'd like to see them in the exclusion list under the UK legislation. In terms of the maybe I will bring in colleagues in terms of the wider question you asked, which is not easy to answer because it's a technical bill about the definition of efficiency and effectiveness, etc. I don't know, Peter, do you want to add anything?
Yes, it is quite complicated because the reservation is quite technical in nature. The first thing to say is that although technical standards and requirements in some circumstances are reserved, the powers aren't actually limited to technical issues. So anything that's non-technical would be devolved in case of efficiency, effectiveness and environmental impact. The other key thing to note is that there's mention of IP completion day in the Scotland Act, so that basically means the end of the Brexit transition period. And therefore, there's a distinction between existing EU legislation and the technical matters in there, and anything that is new that would be legislated on by the EU in the future. And the latter would be devolved in the case of efficiency, effectiveness and environmental impact, whereas existing EU legislation would be reserved. So it is indeed quite a complex mixture.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for confirming the complexity of the issue, which is helpful in itself. Can I just ask one more thing around, and Minister, you referenced the issue of EU alignment. Are there things the Scottish Government would do differently from the UK Government in terms of its regulation powers in this area? Or is it too early to make that prediction? And I'm thinking, in the context of what you said, I mean, I know that, the general approach of the Scottish Government is to progress EU alignment where possible, but it's, would the Scottish Government seek to do that, even if it meant taking a different approach from the UK Government?
Your question raises a number of questions. So, again, we'd have to wait and see how the secondary legislation is used under an enabling bill, because clearly we look at each case and its merits, but the government's policy in Scotland is to align as far as possible with EU legislation. And we welcome the fact that the new Labour government is not actively non-aligning, which is perhaps what the previous UK government took as a position. So there is a change, and we're paying close attention to that, and hopefully have a constructive relationship with the UK government through any proposed secondary legislation. So I would really have to wait and see the secondary legislation, what they're proposing, and we'd look at that. There is the wider issue of the internal markets, which colleagues may wish to ask about, or you may have been discussing. So that then takes us into a slightly different debate, but it's very linked to this as well, potentially. So in terms of whether we take a different position and what would happen if we did take a different position, it's therefore then taking into debate around the Internal Market Act. Does that make sense? So, you know, because obviously we know there's examples where we have taken a different position and the internal market's been used to stop that going forward. So that would have implications for that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So, Murdo, can I bring in Lorna Slater?
Thank you very much, Convener. I'm going to assume that this legislation was initiated under the Conservative government before the general election, and I guess, as the Minister points out, their intention was they had a different direction of travel, perhaps, than the current government. So, can the Minister or officials please comment on how this legislation might interact with the Internal Market Act and how it might limit Scotland from taking the lead on fully devolved environmental protection and with maintaining alignment with the EU?
Okay. So I'll give a quick response to that, and Ewan may wish to come in because as a resident expert on these issues. So clearly the big picture is what I was beginning to allude to in response to Murdo Fraser, which is, should Scotland take a different view under this Act or under the hopefully confirmed devolved aspects of this Act, that could be overridden by the Internal Market Act. So should we take a different view over any of the product legislation, then clearly, even though Scotland had adopted a different regulation and that was in place and passed by this Parliament, the business community or manufacturers, whoever, could just align with the English regulation and be protected by the Internal Market Act, potentially. So that's the kind of direct relevance of this. I'll ask Ewan to maybe add in.
Of course, thank you, Minister. Good morning, committee. I think we need to guard against too much speculation as to how this may play out. But as the Minister states, a relevant measure made under the Act would be caught by the Internal Market Act as any other measure would. So a scenario where the use of the delegated powers in the bill were used to create England-only provision that diverged from the regulatory requirements in Scotland. The mutual recognition principles of the bill could raise questions as to the legal effect of laws made, and we've seen that, as the Minister has alluded to, in legislation passed by this Parliament. But this takes us into a speculative realm. It will depend on the nature of the measures taken under the delegated powers.
Thank you. I've got one more question, Convener. So under the devolution settlement, the Scottish Parliament should be able to scrutinise and give consent to legislation that concerns devolved matters. So this bill, in its current drafting, has no requirement to obtain consent in all these devolved areas. I mean, the Scottish Greens agree with the Scottish Government that this legislation does not respect the devolution settlement and will not give consent to it in its current drafting. Does the Minister know whether the new Labour Government is open to redrafting this legislation, or will this be the first incident where they breach the Sewell Convention?
We're getting some positive signals from the UK Government. So whilst these negotiations are ongoing, we're not over the line yet, so we have to wait and see. But certainly I had a meeting with Lord Leong, who's the Minister in the House of Lords dealing with this on behalf of the UK Government, because this is going through the House of Lords just now. So we had a constructive meeting, and we're waiting to now see what happens next. But there is discussions on an ongoing basis, so I think we're reasonably positive that there will be some movement in Scotland's favour that respects the devolution settlement, but of course, we just have to wait and see.
It could be overridden by the Internal Market Act in any case.
And that's always a concern. Once this is an enabling act, so once the delegated power, should they be used, then there could be instances where, of course, as you say, no matter what this Parliament takes under devolved powers, then it could be overridden by the Internal Market Act. But again, that's kind of 2 steps away from where we are just now, so we're just trying to focus on fixing this.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks so much, Lorna. Minister, you're obviously having constructive discussions with the UK Government. Can you say a bit more about the specific asks that you've put in place? What are the solutions in the eyes of the Scottish Government?
So firstly, in terms of what I alluded to before, is having a match between the list of what is devolved in this area under the Scotland Act with what's excluded under the UK Act, because clearly that should be matched in our view, and that would respect the devolution settlement in the Scottish Parliament. Then there's the issue around to what extent the Secretary of State and UK Government uses this legislation to bring forward secondary legislation, and where it impinges on devolved powers, we clearly want to see that legislative consent has to be sought from the Scottish Parliament. And there's the wider issue, but we'll be paying attention to in terms of the environmental impact of products, and we want to see that there's also consent sought where that's impacting Scotland as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Minister. Oh, Michelle, sorry.
Thank you. Good morning, Minister. Just so that I'm clear, I think you may have said this already, that the lists, or rather the mismatch in terms of what is specifically devolved and set out in terms of the Scotland Act, you're seeking to see the same list in here, but you make the point that the UK IMA could overwrite that regardless. I think that's the point you made earlier, in which case, what's the point of that? And how are you seeking to address, because the UK IMA, we know that there was a most comprehensive cross-party report here in this Parliament that set out a whole range of issues. How, as beyond just that list matching, what else are you doing to make the point about the UK IMA in the light of this and the complexities therein?
Well, we have a new UK government, and the First Minister and colleagues are clearly raising those issues in terms of the Internal Market Act. We'd like to see that removed from the statute book. And we await to see what the response is from the UK government, because clearly, because we've got a new government, there's a more constructive relationship so far. We want to see results from that new constructive relationship, so it's a good test of the UK government and the new UK government as to whether Scotland's concerns over the Internal Market Act are addressed by them. So time will tell. I can't answer that question just now. But again, that's a backdrop, and it's a very serious issue, and it's a backdrop issue. But in terms of day-to-day legislation that's going through the UK parliaments, we have to make sure that the devolved settlement is respected. So that's what this is about. And clearly, we can't predict how these delegated powers will be used, because, as I said before, this is an enabling act. So should the UK government at that point bring forward legislation, we want to make sure that devolution is protected. Otherwise, these issues will be obviously very important and would be against Scotland's wishes. So that's why we want these assurances put in this bill at this time, as we do with all legislation. And it's obviously disappointing that from the word go that these assurances were not contained within the bill, but we are having that constructive discussion with the UK government about making sure it's amended. And in terms of your point of the 2 lists, clearly that's one of our objectives, as I said before, is to get matches of the 2 lists.
And you make the point rightly that this is an enabling or a framework bill, and you'll be aware that there's been quite a lot of discussion in this Parliament about framework bills and what they enable, both in terms of efficiency and effectiveness and scrutiny by individual MSPs, whether it's within the chamber or at a committee level. Have you given any thought to how you will ameliorate the potential risks if Scottish ministers have the potential to potentially give consent but still ensure the appropriate scrutiny can take place, given that framework bills refer to some, exactly as the clues, I guess, in the name, but really limit effective scrutiny on the actuality within the chamber, and that's a generally considered issue across this chamber as well.
Once we saw any secondary legislation with delegated powers are being used under this enabling power, that would be the time at which we would make sure the scrutiny was there, because clearly if it impinged on devolved issues, then we'd have a process in the Scottish Parliament to allow that to be scrutinised by committees and others. And also stakeholders would be able to have their views as well, because the Scottish Government, of course, would have to take a decision as to whether or not to recommend consent on each issue. So that's probably the stage at which that would happen, the scrutiny and you know, involving stakeholders, because at the moment it's very vague. This is a very high-level enabling bill, so it's very difficult for any of us, including stakeholders, to give a view, because you know, you can see from looking at this, it's high-level and quite broad. In terms of the definitions of what this would cover. So, you know, we're not in that position yet to give that clarity.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Can I bring in Willie Coffey?
Thanks, Convener. Minister, in your list there, you mentioned pesticides as an example, I think, of environmental impact products and so on. Could you clarify, are we facing the prospect that the UK could have a different approach to the sale, the transport, the use of pesticides in Scotland that would fundamentally oppose the views that the Scottish Government might take on the same matter? And could you say something about the situation that might apply to Northern Ireland, which more closely is allowed to align with EU guidelines on this? So is it possible that we could have 3 sets of circumstances that could apply to the use, sale, transport of pesticides?
Well, all I can say at the moment is the reason why we're determined to try and secure these assurances for the Scottish Parliament and respect evolution under this bill is to ensure we avoid those scenarios. And you know, so I can't foresee how the UK government will use this legislation and use their enabling powers, so whether it's in pesticides or anything else, I don't know. But what we want to do is safeguard against those scenarios by ensuring that pesticides, which is one subject that's devolved, is therefore respected under that bill, the UK bill, so that these are decisions for Scottish ministers and not for UK ministers. So that's all I can really say about that at the moment. And of course, in terms of Northern Ireland's relationship with the EU, you'll be aware that it's been repeated many times that the Scottish Government, given the irony that Scotland voted against Brexit, did not get the same helpful access to the EU market that Northern Ireland has. So, and you know, there's also a separate big debate around that. I think you know what's going on. Yeah.
Thank you, Minister. Just on a technical point, Mr. Coffey, one of the very few areas that's excluded from the automatic effect of the Internal Market Act's market access provisions is pesticides.
Okay, Willie. Okay, I don't think we have any more members' questions, so unless the Minister's got anything finally to say, can I thank the Minister and officials for joining us today. That brings this evidence session on the LCM to a close, so I'll briefly suspend the meeting to allow for the changeover of witnesses. Thank you. Okay, our next item of business is the third evidence session of our inquiry into city, region and regional growth deals. Last week, the committee heard from some of the more established deals, and today's session will focus on the more recent deals. So can I therefore very much welcome our panel this morning. Malcolm Benny, Director of Place Services in the Falkirk Growth Deal, David McDowell, Head of Economic Growth in the Ayrshire Growth Deal, Anne Murray, Chief Officer, Economic and Community Regeneration in the Islands Growth Deal, and Rick O'Farrell, Director of the Borderlands Inclusive Growth Deal. Now, I failed miserably to do this last week, but as always, I'll ask members and witnesses to keep the questions and the answers as concise as possible, so we can get through as many questions as possible. And to start our questioning, can I bring in Daniel Johnson?
Thank you very much, Convener, and can I also express my welcome to our panellists. Just to kind of give you fair warning, given there's a lot of us on the committee and a lot of you in terms of the panel, whoever flinches first is where I'll direct my question. So I'll be watching very intently how you react. But in broad terms, I think we are interested about how the city-region deals work within the broader policy context, how they've been constructed, and kind of how they are overseen and to what effect they will have. So, given that you represent some of the more recent deals, I'd just like to begin by asking the panel to what degree you benefited from the previous experience of the previous growth deals and how that informed the way that your deal was constructed and put together. And Anne Murray, you were the one who was nodding first from the panel, so I'm afraid I'm going to go to you first.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think we have benefited from coming last, so to speak. I think we're one of the more recent deals we signed, full deal agreement in January 2023. We've certainly benefited a lot from the processes and the experiences of other growth deals and the learning that's been shared between the growth deals. So that's been a really positive experience. I think largely led by the growth deals themselves and some of the more established ones where they've been willing through the PMO network to share resources, approaches to benefits realisation, approaches to sustainable procurement and things like that. So there's certainly been a good community built up around the growth deals in terms of those that are working on them.
So I'm quite interested in what you were saying there. So you're discussing things like benefits realisation, PMO. That's obviously things about the actual sort of the mechanism and organisation of the growth deal itself. Is that primarily where that benefit focused, or actually, I mean, the other element I'm interested in is how the projects were identified and put together, and actually how they fit together overall. I mean, was there any sort of experience that was shared in terms of the methodologies and processes for identifying those projects themselves?
Looking back, I mean, I was only involved at a kind of officer level within Western Isles Council at that point, but we did get some input from Scottish Futures Trust on the process and work that was going on in other areas around identification of potential projects and prioritisations. But I don't think we reached out specifically to other areas at that point in time.
This is perhaps, I don't know if you can judge if this is an unfair question or not. Was there anything that or observations made by the previous growth deals about things to avoid or things that they had wished they had known when they were embarking on their growth deals?
I'm not aware of anything.
No, fine. I just really ask, through that question up, Malcolm, you're looking most attentively now. I mean, again, similar sorts of questions. What benefit do you think you received from the previous growth deals in terms of the framing, construction and setting up of your growth deal?
Thanks for the question. I would say that there's an active national PMO group who gather and meet regularly, and we found that an incredibly useful source of experience and reference points to talk about how to navigate the journey. But I would also say that our experience is that coming later in the growth deal process has its challenges as well, because our view is that the level of bureaucracy around the deals has increased, so that those deals which came early in the process maybe had more flexibility and less rigour applied to them. And certainly ourselves, I don't want to speak for colleagues here, but we've found the level of administration bureaucracy has almost been such that every learning point that's come from every single deal that's ever happened has built and built and built, so that us coming in at the end have to navigate our way through all that kind of regulation, if you like. So I think it comes with benefits and some negatives as well.
Could you just maybe elaborate and give some examples of the sorts of bureaucracy that you're having to go through that's maybe new? And also, what's the source of that? Is that UK government, Scottish government? And while there may be a volume of it, does it make sense, or do you feel it's a frustration?
I want to present this properly, in so much as we as a council are absolutely delighted to work with the UK and Scottish governments to receive significant amounts of funding. So the overall process and the overall position is obviously one of definite positive, but
the math, I think, is that
exactly. Our view would be that there was a level of flexibility within the way that business cases were maybe developed for those earlier plans. You know, there was more pace, more kind of flexibility applied, and the movement of money between projects was potentially a little bit more flexible. But as we've reached our case, I think the development of business cases has become very intense. You know, and it's not for me to, draw assessments on government responsibilities for imparting, financial packages to councils. But our view would be that the level of PMO provision that we've had to take on ourselves, because you don't get any seed funding with your growth deal packages to help create a PMO team. You have to take that on as a council. You have to develop quite intense business cases, and our view would be, particularly with regard to the option appraisal element of those business cases, we have found those to be, in our view, of maybe less value than what they should. So the strategic case has already identified the projects that you want to develop, and then we have begun the development of those projects, and then as we approach the point where we sign off the deal, we're having to do quite extensive options appraisals on whether that was the right thing to do. So in our case, we're going to create a new Falkirk Town Hall Arts Centre. That project's been in development for a long time, and we've already bought a site to do that, but then you have to do an options appraisal to evidence that that was the right thing to do. But the project's kind of moved beyond that, stage.
Well, I can see the AV person being somewhat twitchy. I think you might have a mobile device near the microphone or something that's just causing a bit of buzz. I think that sounds much better. Thank you. Oh, no, it's still there. Maybe it is me. Well, let's just... So, when you're talking there, that's primarily focused on the requirements around your business cases. I mean, is it just a sort of a kind of the amount of requirements and inflexibility, or but are they relatively well articulated, or is it sort of more informal and sort of querying and less formalised? I mean, is it burdensome but clear, or is it a burden because it's not clear? Is really what I'm asking.
I would say it's clear that you understand the nature of the engagement and what's expected. I think our teams would have the view at times it feels like the Green Book is guidance, but maybe the application of the Green Book from the Treasury, you know, it has become very sort of almost like it's you have to deliver your project as though that's the rules. And I don't think the Green Book was written with that intention. It was written to sort of provide a framework and a kind of guidance of how you might approach projects, and then you might apply different elements of that guidance depending upon the project that you face. But I think that over time that's become almost quite rigid in the way that you have to develop everything. And our team have found that at times like we're putting in intensive resources for a limited return on that value in terms of reassurance or scrutiny.
Okay. So I just say to David McDowell and Rick O'Farrell, I mean, is there anything you would want to add? I'm not proposing to put the whole question, but just so in the yes, Mr. McDowell.
First of all, just obviously, we've in Ayrshire, I think we were the first deal to come forward after the City deal, so we really appreciate the fact that we've got more than £103 million from both governments. We've obviously had to, as the three councils, invest £45 million. Now that's a huge investment. There's to add to my colleague here, there's a number of areas of risk that we have to put forward in that £45 million. So we don't see any of that money back until such times as we've completed the final business case. And as you've just said, the rigour and intensity can be quite detailed. We fully appreciate you have to follow the money and make sure we're getting best value, but there is a level of intensity which can change with different Scottish or UK government personnel. It can also, one of the recent kind of highlights was when we have obviously gone through a outline business case just now for one of our projects, the Advanced Manufacturing Investment Corridor in Kilmarnock. And that project needs obviously an economic analysis on it. We don't have that capability inside, so we share that resource with Glasgow City through their Regional Intelligence Hub. What we've done is we've employed that economist to review that for us, and that position was put forward to both governments, and we got quite a long checklist back of things that of iterations that we needed to change. And I think the summary position from Glasgow was that there's a higher standard now than what they were asked for at that particular time. Now that can come from different people at different time. You know, we find that there's a number of personnel that are maybe long-standing now with the growth deals from governments, but in other cases there's new people, so they have a reflection in the work that they are looking at, and it's almost felt that they have to ask particular questions. So,
yes, I think our experience in Borderlands is slightly different to Mountains, perhaps, in that we're comfortable with the Green Book and how the Green Book works and the appraisals that are done. It's particularly important, I think, for the smaller projects from marginal applicants, if you like. The frustration we have, though, is the time taken by the double handling and the fact that we seem, to an extent, not to be trusted as a programme that has, in my case, 2 accountable officers, a Section 151 officer in England and a Section 95 officer in Scotland. So we do our detailed appraisals in the PMO, and then somebody in London second-guesses them, and it just seems to be a level of bureaucracy. If they're saying you're an accountable body, we've agreed the strategic objectives of this programme review, the 2 governments have agreed how much each government will put into this. We have agreed the projects up front in the actual deal in terms of the major capital projects. We would expect to have more freedoms and flexibilities along the lines that Mountain said the early town deals had. Instead, we end up in this cycle of reiterating through the Green Book rather than being trusted as accountable bodies. Having said all of that, we are now, as part of our deal, negotiating, pushing a very open door, particularly on the English side, pushing a very open door on some freedoms and flexibilities to make the bureaucracy less burdensome.
Thank you very much. That's actually a really useful set of insights, and I kind of get a sense of maybe slight frustration, and so that's very helpful. Look, I'll just ask one brief additional question, although it might lead to an expansive answer. I mean, I guess one of the concerns is that while with all the growth deals, both within the deals but also between them, can see lots of good projects, but actually, how do they all align, both within growth deals, but actually more particularly between growth deals? Is there a danger here that we have policies that might work for your particular area, but do they all join up? Is the sum great? The whole greater than the sum of the parts? To what extent do you think there's are there wider strategies at play? Do your deals, play nicely with your neighbouring deals, or is that something that I think is that something that should be looked at as we move forward?
Yeah, I'll just come in the back of that. Just to give you an example, obviously when we do our outline business cases, if we've got particular sector delivery models for, in this case, a food and drink centre of excellence, we have to make sure that that isn't provided any elsewhere locally within the west side of Scotland. So there is a analysis carried out both by ourselves as part of the outline business case and from the kind of wider national perspective. So, for instance, if we were putting forward the strategic position that we were looking to do a project which was effectively aligned with another project in central Scotland that it was considered that it wasn't sustainable in our area, we wouldn't be able to take it forward. So there is that level of scrutiny right at the outset. So
that's from the external perspective. From your perspective, do you think that works? Because that's about things stopping you from doing things. Do you think that are there sort of projects that you have in mind where actually they're sort of mutually reinforcing or building towards?
Yeah, I think it's important that when we look at projects, we make sure that they're unique, can be delivered for the local place, and they're sustainable. So it is important to have that scrutiny and to work across the regions to understand that what you're proposing is unique to the area and is not replicated, and you're not in competition with some of your local neighbours.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. In the case of the Borderlands, and I imagine to an extent in the case of the other programmes, the main drivers in the partnership were the local authorities, and I have 5 local authorities, 2 on your side of the border, 3 on the English side of the border. It's the local authority economic regeneration teams or whatever growth teams or whatever badge they happen to have, who are the lead partners and who drive the projects forward. And they are, if I take the case of Northumberland, we have 3 town deals as well as the Borderlands growth deal. And they're the same people, so we can get that synergy between the projects. And I've sat in a room where they've said, well, this project is more appropriate to Borderlands because it meets the overall Borderlands objectives. This one, we'll take down a different funding source. We do that across the 5 authorities between Scottish Borders Council and Dumfries and Galloway. We'll talk to one another about the mountain bike project or the South of Scotland Skills Programme and which projects should be brought forward to avoid that duplication. Where perhaps we're not quite as clever is talking between the big deals which we have here. So within a geographic patch, I'm more than happy that we're doing all the things that I think you would wish to see. With our neighbours, perhaps not quite as good, and perhaps we might all talk about that afterwards through that PMO, the Programme Management Office network that I think Malcolm mentioned earlier.
Great. I mean, I'll probably leave it there unless Anne-Marie or Malcolm Benny, you particularly want to raise anything.
Okay, thank you very much. Daniel, can I bring in Gordon MacDonald?
Much, Convener, and good morning, panel. In previous weeks, we've talked about inflationary pressures on particularly the older deals. And, in recent years, we've had over 20% inflation on materials, and the construction industry forecasts another 15% over the coming 5 years. So I'm keen to learn 2 things. What impact has inflation had on the projects you had planned? And have you learned any lessons from how city deals have coped with inflationary pressures? And I'll come to David first, since you've got the oldest growth deal of the 4.
Sure. We've we've had an impact, obviously, inflationary pressures on our projects. Obviously, some of the, particularly in the wider region, some of the maritime projects have been impacted because obviously there's inflation and impacting on those projects, but hampered by the fact you're working in water as well. So there's that. In terms of one project that I'm leading on is the Community Renewable Energy Project, which is based in Cumnock, and we have a centre of excellence there for a skills academy. We had a partner involved in the University of Strathclyde, and during the pandemic they decided to review their own position, as universities have done. And that brought us to look at the position and also the building. At that particular time, we just put planning consent. We were at a stage where we're looking to come into final heads of terms, but we had to review that because the construction inflation at that particular time meant that we couldn't afford to build that building. If you take that on to some of our economic infrastructure projects, we have a fixed budget, and that fixed budget is supported by, where we can, external funding. So in one case, we are looking at working with Vodafone for 5G connectivity to that site. So they'll invest in that site as well as a council through the growth deal. But it may be that once we actually get to procure the actual buildings as such and construct them, we might be building less square footage than we were originally under the deal when it was originally conceived, and particularly when it was signed in 2020. So we are looking, constantly at just the pressures in the market to understand, is it the right time? If we were building, we probably could build more just now than what we could 2 years ago. So, but it's just about constantly keeping an eye on the market and making sure we're getting the best value from our procurement, and to ensure that we can get that added value from external businesses that are out there, both investing in the area and from the construction process.
And before I open it up to other people, was there any other lessons learned from the previous city deals that came before you in terms of reprofiling or value engineering or timescales extended, or
We've had to extend timescales and review and readdress matters, because as you've heard, in terms of delivering an outline business case and a final business case, there's a big period of time between those, and the markets are constantly moving. So we've had to flex as best we can. We've had to re-engineer the re-engineering, as it were. So we constantly are looking at how to deliver it, and as I say, looking at best procurement practice to deliver on certain projects, whether that's a traditional tender, using hubs, or indeed having a build spec where the risk is taken by the contractor. So through design and build. So it is looking at all options to try to make sure we can maximise the pound, and indeed link with other partners to ensure that we can get more value into that development from external partners, whether it's in food and drink, engineering, aviation.
Rick, your Borderlands was March 21.
Borderlands March 21, and inflation has had a huge impact on the programme. To answer the direct question about have we learned from other town deals or city deals, etc., it's a yes and no answer. The people in the 5 partners who are dealing with the programme are all experienced economic regeneration professionals. They've got a long background in bringing forward major capital projects. So their experience may come from a previous town deal, a particular piece of experience. It may come from just a major capital project they did 10 years ago. So we do all the things which David has talked about. We have several capital projects which are facing a major overspend, to the point that it would stop the programme, that those projects could not proceed. And they would total probably about £150 million of the £350 million resource. So we put in place a programme to do the value engineering, to look at the options again, to look at procurement, to try to trim costs before we consider requests for additional costs. We have proposals in front of the 2 governments, which we gave them 2 weeks ago, following a board meeting, to reset the programme, basically to move money around within the programme. So some things that we no longer believe need to happen, because government have funded them through other means, such as the digital programme here in Scotland, has freed up some resource, so we can move that into those capital projects which have demonstrated they will need more money. And we're talking, for instance, one project for a new university needs an extra £8 million. We've gone through all the process David's outlined, we've evidenced it, and we've asked government if we can move the resources around. So we can still deliver the same programme. We've asked the two governments, apologies. So we can deliver the same programme with the same outputs, but some certain things will be delivered in a different way from other resources.
Okay.
Yes, so our deal quantum was announced back in July 2020, so that was 100 million then across the 3 island groups. The value of that has obviously decreased considerably over the period. The other challenge that we have is the islands uplift on that we experience, so that there's that, and just a more I think it's more challenging in terms of being able to do things with potential suppliers, because the base isn't so great. So what we have seen quite worryingly is even with the cost estimates being brought up to date by QS, experienced QSs in the island context, when projects are going out to tender, they are still coming back considerably over those cost estimates. So that has proved to be really challenging. One of the things we've been seeking to do is feed some of that learning back into other projects. So with one particular tourism capital project that went out to tender earlier in the year, they've kind of shared some of the learning from that with other projects in terms of why was there such a difference in the prices that came back, and a lot of it was to do with material costs and things like that. So we're looking at some of the specific kind of island material factors that are making that difference, and encouraging projects to think about where do they need to look at in terms of the spec of the design, just so that they can make things a bit more deliverable in the end.
I mean, do you foresee the situation where some of the projects you've got may not actually be able to be carried on purely because of the inflationary costs?
I think it's getting to the stage where we need to look at the value for money that still exists in terms of the cost of the project compared to the benefits. So that is certainly going to be a consideration. And a bit similar to Borderlands, we are embarking on a review process just to have a good look at everything and see what can still be achieved with what we have, and working closely with government on where we might need to bring change forward to get to a better programme.
Rick, will you come back in?
Just one small point, Mr MacDonald. I mean, your question focused on inflation. I think it's important to remember that in a long-term programme, 10-year programmes in my instance, projects were thought about perhaps 8 years ago, and somebody put a finger in the air and says to build a mountain bike centre is going to cost £17 million. And that was on the basis of best practice and some estimates. When you get to REBA Stage 4, detailed design, it's inevitably going to cost a lot more. And I think all the programmes are starting to face that as well. It's not just inflation, it's more realistic costings as you get closer to the delivery point. I don't think we should lose sight of that.
Malcolm, you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, so in answer to the question, have we been affected by inflation? Undoubtedly, yes. And I was just going to pick up on that exact point. The strategic outline case for Falkirk was agreed in 2020, so it's been 5 years between that point and the deal being signed. And I don't believe that in 2020, when those figures were apportioned, people said, oh, well, we'll give you quite a lot more money than what it would cost to build now. And not only that, but even within that 10-year programme, there's projects that won't begin for another 7 years. So I'm looking at projects that someone took an estimate on 12 years ago. The further out you go, the harder it is to think accurately. In terms of what we've learned from other deals, I would probably say we've learned that there is a change process for individual projects to go through, and we've observed how those have been navigated, but it doesn't really change the dynamics of the problem that we face.
Okay. My other question is about skills, and I was going to come to you, Anne, first. We've got 208,000 jobs in the construction sector, and the pipeline of work coming through the growth deals is a tiny proportion of the 13 billion every year. So I'm just wondering, how are you finding it with we're at full employment, 3.3% unemployment at the moment. So how are you finding being able to attract the construction companies with the right skills base in order to build the projects that you want to build?
I think one of the key challenges that we're going to face relates to the pipeline of renewable energy developments that are going to be coming through in the islands at the same time as we're anticipating that a lot of our growth deal projects will be hitting the ground and going out to tenders. So we've got the link that SSEN are building across to the Isle of Lewis, all the wind farms that will be coming off the back of that. So we're seeing, I suppose, challenges in terms of the growth deal competing against other things that are going to be happening in the islands. Housing, there's kind of an ongoing housing programme that needs to continue and be accelerated. So I think that's more the challenge. In terms of what's gone out to tender so far, they've managed to get local contractors in to deliver the work. So we've had success so far, but we anticipate that it will become more challenging.
Okay, David.
Yeah, I mean we've kind of constantly have one-to-ones with local businesses and the construction sector is no different. And obviously there's a skills gap there. We have linking through Ayrshire College. We have a kind of skills working group that kind of leads in that. At the time that we undertook the deal, we didn't have a regional economic strategy. We do now. We're into our second year. Skills is obviously one of the key areas in that. And in leading on skills, we have the college that links in with a whole range of partners between the councils, economic development services, education, Chamber of Commerce, SDS, and third sector, and the list goes on. From that, what we're doing is, establishing from those skills gaps, how do we grow our own? Because there's a huge play here to make sure that with the employment rate as it is, and the demography, the way that we are in the west of Scotland and Ayrshire, there's a lot of people tend to leave the area. So what we want to do is to try and get that by featuring on the skills gap, providing apprenticeships, using a whole range of funds, linking through the Ayrshire Skills Investment Fund, which is a growth deal programme, linking back to No One Left Behind and Shared Prosperity Fund, all pulling that together under one aim, and that's to work with businesses and local people to make sure that we can get them into work. We also, as part of the growth deal, are linking back to the schools. So for each of the themes that we have, we're working with the secondary schools to provide and upskill them in areas such as digital, food and drink, engineering. We also suffer from a skills in the kind of wider context from an engineering perspective, because we have the benefit of in the Prestwick Airport and the multinational businesses that are there. Those multinational businesses at the period of the pandemic had let a lot of people go in early retirement and to downsize. They've had to resize because there's a boom now in the aviation industry, and in doing so that there's a serious concern that engineering jobs moving away from local engineering companies right through the whole Ayrshire and probably the west of Scotland into aviation. So we have to strike that balance, and that's why the college is working at the spearhead to get those apprenticeships with the businesses to deliver on that, right through the construction trade, renewable industry trade and engineering.
Okay, Rick, anything you want to add, or Malcolm?
No, not really.
No,
not really. But actually, yes. I mean, one of our key projects is the South of Scotland Skills Capital Programme, which we've just done a call for bids and had a very good response. And we're trying to align the projects which will be supported with the rest of the programme. There's a large energy element in the programme. So again, it's the energy area that we would see as being that where we may have skill shortages down the line, but we're trying to address that through the programme itself.
Yeah. Okay, Malcolm, anything to add?
I was going to say, if the question's in relation to are we encountering problems getting projects moving through a lack of engagement, that's not something that we're facing.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Gordon, can I bring in Kevin Stewart?
Thank you, Convener. If you excuse the expression, you're a mixed bag, basically. Quite new, but Falkirk, one local authority, basically. Ayrshire, 3 local authorities, wee bit of islands there. Obviously, 3 archipelagos in Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles. Mr O'Farrell, you've got probably the worst bag of all in terms of that cross-border aspect that you have to deal with. What I'm interested in is in terms of governance and scrutiny. We've been told by previous witnesses that there's a fair bit of a democratic deficit. Nobody could say that what you're doing is a people power scenario. So what I'm interested in is the governance aspect and the scrutiny aspect and how that is done in your own areas. So let's start off with the easy one and go to Mr Benny for Falkirk, please.
Thank you. I would say that that governance is done through the council. So at the outline business case stage, the projects that are being put forward for consideration was approved by the council, and throughout the process between that and then the deal being signed off, reports have come forward to continue to update on how those projects are developing. And if public opinion was such that elected members were of the view that one or more of those projects was no longer suitable or valid, then that could have been prosecuted through the council meetings and changes made. But I think there was a shared understanding that we were well beyond that point and that those were the projects that had been agreed. That would be my view in terms of sort of community engagement and governance. Obviously, we have a Growth Deal Board, which has a cross-section of different partners on it, including independent members. And as we've talked before, there's significant scrutiny from both UK and Scottish governments.
Okay, Grant. Mr McDowell, please.
So we have obviously got now a regional framework that's in place that delivers a regional economic partnership, which is set up now that has a whole range of stakeholders that scrutinise the projects as they come through, whether it's revenue or capital.
Give us a flavour of the stakeholders, please.
Well, in terms of, you've got Federation of Small Businesses, you've got the Chamber of Commerce, you've got Scottish Enterprise, you've got the governments, you've also got 3 councils, SDS. So there is a long list, but it's quite a wide range. In terms of going back to first principles about the actual linking in with the community, when this was conceived, there was links. When the Growth Deal projects were taken forward, there was obviously discussion through the community planning process, linking back to linking in with businesses, and then there's an evolution from there into the actual business cases. I think what's quite clear in my experience is that where we've got revenue projects, those revenue projects are, that's in the face of communities and businesses, and they see the benefit of that. And that's the general feedback, particularly with the community wealth building. Here's a skills fund for businesses and working for a healthy economy. For the capital projects, they hear about the funding through the Ayrshire Growth Deal, but they don't see the bricks and mortar, and that's a challenge for us. So that's something that we're working with at each stage of the process to get more involvement and to make sure that when communities are aware of what's happening in terms of these projects and the added benefits that they'll deliver.
Okay, we'll maybe come back to some of that. Ms Murray, please.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of governance, I think similar to many other deals, we, as a multi-authority deal, we've got a joint committee which has representation, member representation from the three partner councils. Underneath that, we've got a programme board, which is the chief executives and the senior responsible officers. We've got an advisory forum, which I think was similar to the structure you were talking about, where we've got representation from FSB, Visit Scotland, third sector representation from across the islands. We've also got, we do have a communications plan, but I would agree that perhaps the level of communication that we've carried out with communities has been perhaps somewhat limited now that the deal is up and running. I suppose we're kind of cautious. We're communicating on the projects when they're ready to go, so there's communication around specific projects, but we are aware that the deal might need to change as well, so I think there's a balance there to be struck in terms of the dialogue that we have with communities.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Mr O'Farrell, please.
Yes, I think there's different tiers of governance, are there not? Malcolm reflected on the governance that is applied to the programme by central governments. So there is that element of governance. Like the other ones, we have a programme board, which is the 5 local authority leaders. They make the majority of key decisions on the programme. So they meet regularly, we take reports to them, and they make the decisions. We have an investment forum, which has delegated powers from the board, from the 5 leaders, to look at certain smaller projects. The 5 leaders, in turn, are responsible to their councils. I know, for instance, last week, the leader of Northumberland, Councillor Sanderson, had to go before their scrutiny committee, or his officers did. I think he did as well. The scrutiny committee on the economy in Northumberland, and report on the progress and the decisions made by the Borderlands board as a whole. A large part of the programme, we have £50 million devoted to what we call the PLACE programme, which are small projects in 30 of the smaller towns. They're governed slightly differently. We're looking for local partnerships to be established in those towns, and Stranraer is a great example. They have probably our strongest local partnership across the Borderlands, and apologies to any others that are watching this. And they develop the projects themselves. That's definitely a bottom-up approach. So the local community, where we can energise the local community to become involved, and it's different across communities, they determine which projects will be brought forward. So they are genuinely what the people of those areas want. So that's another tier of governance. That they're approved at the end of the day by the board, but that's where they start from. It's not a top-down officers such as ourselves deciding that this is the best project to go in an area.
Okay. So a little bit of people power there in terms of some money going to smaller community groups to decide.
A lot of money, £3 million per area. The issue we have is that a lot of the community groups don't have the capacity to actually develop a green book appraisal, going back to Malcolm's point earlier. So we're having to provide resource to help those groups to bring the capacity in, economic professionals, to help them work up their business plan for their ideas so it would meet the requirements of the governments to actually put funding into it. But yeah, a lot of money, £3 million per community.
Okay, some would say that's a sweetener compared to the
I couldn't possibly comment.
The complete amounts of cash that's going into the deal. Mr McDowell, you said earlier, you know, folk hadn't really been involved in some of the major capital projects. Do you think that these things are the people's priorities?
I think what my understanding of the communities and their discussions is they want to see where the jobs are. But I think the delay has been that from the concept to delivery has been a period of time. And that's been, as we've heard earlier on, linked in through the delays that you have to go from strategic to outline to final business cases. And we're trying to reduce that through staged and phased approaches. I think it's clear that we, as we deal with the capital projects, we go through, these are major developments, so we go through the planning process, and there's significant local consultation with communities on the projects themselves, and obviously it's quite key at that stage that we're working with the local business to make sure that the supply chain is supported, and how we take those that delivery forward with the local businesses and the community.
Okay. Ms Murray, I think you said, and sorry if I didn't pick you up right, and I'm paraphrasing, that local folk were probably involved at the beginning, but not so much now. Would that be fair to say?
I was actually just going to come in to highlight that a number of our projects, and it's probably reflective of the type of, the level of social enterprise and voluntary and community involvement we have in the islands. A number of our projects are led by community organisations. So, for example, the Callanish Stones redevelopment, which is now on site as a 10 million project, that is a community-led project. We have a number of other community-led projects throughout the deal. So I would hope that these projects are, by their very nature and by the composition of their boards, are reflective of the desires of these local communities.
Sorry, I'm smiling as you're saying the Callanish Stones redevelopment. I hope there's no too much change there.
Yeah. The centre redevelopment.
I'm joking.
Just to be clear.
How do you think you could do better in terms of communicating with the general public around about the benefits of these deals? Who's going to go first? Ms Murray, your mic's on.
Well, my light's on, so I can just carry on. I think it's when they see things happening on the ground that they will see the benefits of the deal. So with the skills, the talent...
Which might be a very long time in some cases.
Well, I think with the skills programme that we've recently had, a proportion of that approved, which is university-led, will be... That's something that we're hoping will be getting things happening and delivered on the islands very soon. So I think once people see those kind of tangible things happening, they'll start to see the benefits.
Any quick fire answers from folk? Mr O'Farrell?
You're absolutely right. We need to do better. I had a gruelling time at our Borderlands board last week and was told that we need to communicate better the benefits, even though it's a very early stage. We need to do better.
Mr
Redevelopment strategy.
Yeah, we've obviously, with a number of these projects, take them to the schools, and once we're in working with secondary schools, they actually see that there's merit in careers in those type of sectors, food and drink, engineering, and it's been once the kids are on board. Likewise with the renewable sector, and we link in, we've got 31 farms in the area, so we bring those renewable companies into schools as well to give the kids the benefit of their expertise. So once we have that kind of knowledge and expertise linked back into the schools, it's a case of upskilling the knowledge and expertise right into the communities, and there's a community campaign obviously to help them support with that. But
Mr Benny?
I think just to return to the starting point of your question, which was about, are these the things that people most care about? I think that's a difficult kind of question, because if you probably go up to residents in Falkirk and ask what are the things they most want to see, they would talk about roads or investment in schools and things like that. But the nature of a growth deal project is about added GVA to the area.
So this is the kind of thing that naffs people off and is not a people's priority. Added GVA means nothing to your average Joe and Josephine in the street. Surely this is about jobs and the future of the economy. Jobs.
I agree with that, but...
So why is it not sold as that? Why do you... And I know you're in front of a parliamentary committee, but why GVA and why don't we talk about jobs and prosperity and the future? Those are our people's priorities.
I'm happy to agree with that, but I also think the point that was addressed by one of my colleagues is that people like to see things. Until something is in front of them, they can see it built. They don't tend to feel a lot of engagement with it. So I think that projects need to, get spades in the ground. And once that happens, I think the public will engage with the project that's coming.
I think one of the problems is that we don't talk the people's language. And it doesn't necessarily mean the spades in the ground aspect. It is how we're going to get to that point of the spades in the ground and building those jobs. Very quickly, Mr McDowell.
I was just going to say that the Ayrshire Skills Investment Fund is a good example of how we've supported business in getting, more people upskilled and more people into work. And I think that's quite the key issue is about jobs and making sure that people see that they've got an opportunity to go from a smaller job and increase their expertise and into one that's a good paying job.
Okay. Very quickly, and you don't need to answer this, Ms Murray, because you already did, because you said that the third sector are involved at various levels within your growth deals. Quick yes or no answers from the others. Are the third sector involved in stakeholder groups and scrutiny? Mr O'Farrell?
Only in the PLACE programme at the moment.
Mr McDowell?
Yes, but no, attendance isn't great.
Okay. Mr Benny?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks very much, Kevin. I'll briefly bring in Michelle for a supplementary.
Thank you. It's just following on from a point that my colleague Kevin had made in terms of noting I think, what was it, the term used, a bag full of mixed bag. That was it. Thank you. Malcolm, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the governance of the Falkirk and Grangemouth growth deal, whilst it's ostensibly more simple because it's just got Falkirk Council, it's also more complex given that INEOS is absolutely at the heart of the future, and therefore INEOS's vested interests will necessarily come to the fore. From a governance perspective, I wanted to ask how you are consciously addressing that.
I mean, INEOS have a representative on the Growth Deal board, but I would say that I haven't experienced any conflicts. My view is that everyone who's on that board, including INEOS, are all working together to think about what the best future is for the Falkirk and Grangemouth area. The projects we have in front of us all help to deliver that. So I haven't found a kind of conflict or a sense that we're being moved to places that we necessarily feel would be something that INEOS wants rather than something that the Falkirk Growth Deal wants to do.
Mm. Yeah, but the very necessity, I mean, PetroChina, obviously, with INEOS at the heart of that, want to move away now. Obviously, the Scottish Government has called for a pause in their plans to move to an import-only facility, and they're at the very heart of the growth deal, and it is their wish to close the refinery. That's clearly quite a conflict of interest. In other words, they're at the very heart of devising the programme that is in their own interests. So I was asking how you were consciously dealing with that. It sounds to me like this isn't something that has been reflected on, that there could at least be the potential of a conflict of interest, even if one is not occurring.
My own view would be I don't necessarily agree with that kind of view that INEOS aren't directly linked to the delivery of the projects within the Falkirk and Grangemouth growth deal. So their role
on the board, they're all clearly influencing it. If they're on the board level, I wouldn't be expecting them necessarily to deliver, but they're a key influencer by merit of being on the board.
And I would say their input's been a positive on the board in terms of providing. We have several innovation projects that involve sort of cutting-edge technology, which isn't necessarily a space that local authorities would currently operate in. So having a highly experienced, successful business leader on the board to kind of advise and give some sort of guidance and scrutiny on those projects, in my view, has been helpful. I understand the point you're making, but I just haven't experienced that that risk or that sense that there's a conflict of interest in terms of the delivery of the projects that we're taking forward through the growth deal.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Can I bring in Murdo Fraser?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the panel. I'd like to go back to the question of funding, which was touched on earlier in the questions from Daniel Johnson. And there was two specific things I'd like to ask, which I think just to save time, I'll ask them both at the same time. The first is, to what extent have you sought to draw in any private sector funding for your deals, and how successful has that been? And secondly, how have you sought to interact with other sources of public sector funding, such as levelling up funds, shared prosperity funds, Scottish National Investment Bank, research and innovation funding, for example? So going beyond the narrow scope of the funding in the deals, how have you been able to look at other public sector sources? Mr. O'Farrell, you're looking at me. I'll start with you.
Yes. First part of the question, Mr. Fraser. Some of our projects are actually led by the private sector. So the private sector, when we were developing the programme, the board and the various partners looked at what we felt was needed, strategic priorities, and the private sector were around the table then. We do have an economic forum, but it's in abeyance at the moment. And they have brought forward their own money to develop projects. A major tourism project in Alnwick Gardens, supported by the Duchess of Northumberland with her own money. A new whisky distillery in Northumberland. That may actually be a heresy to people in Scotland. Whisky distillery in Northumberland, largely funded by the private sector. Private sector contributions to some of the projects which will be happening on the Scottish side of the border, the major capital projects. So the private sector have not been shy in coming forward, generally if it sees an opportunity, I will admit. The second part of the question involving other public sector funds, I will refer you to my earlier answer where I talked about the drivers, certainly in the Borderlands programme, are the economic regeneration teams within the local authorities who handle those other funds, shared prosperity, town deal, levelling up funds, etc. And when they're looking at their economic strategies, they say, well, which is the best way to deliver this project? Is it using Borderlands money? Is it using shared prosperity or whatever? So that's how we handle it within the Borderlands.
Okay. Because you're in the kind of unique position of crossing the border, Scotland and England, is there any difference in terms of the approach to funding in England compared to Scotland? Any difference in the private sector element of the funding? No, I'm thinking in terms of access to the public sector funds, because obviously in Scotland we have things like the Scottish National Investment Bank, which operates only in Scotland. So is there any difference in the way you can access funding each side of the border? I haven't seen any personally, but that doesn't mean that there hasn't been a difference experienced by the officers on the ground responsible for the individual projects. Right. Thank you. Anne-Marie? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I think in terms of private sector investment, we're at a bit of an early stage for anything that we could quantify, but we do have a number of projects where we're anticipating private sector funding will come in, or where, for example, with Spaceport 1, which is now on site, the public sector is funding the enabling infrastructure, and the anticipation is that a private sector operator will then come in. So it's creating the conditions for that private sector investment. In terms of other funding sources, we're used to pulling together very diverse funding packages. We have benefited a lot from shared prosperity funding in terms of being able to move projects along through the REBA stages. Particularly, a lot of our projects are led by third parties, so they're challenged to be able to get projects to full business case stage, but we've been able to support them with our shared prosperity funding to take them through the REBA stages. So that's been really helpful. Our CGF has been a really important source of funding for the islands over the years, and that has come in on a number of projects. Well, it's come in on one project. Our expectation was that it would come in on more, but obviously that position has changed. We have engaged with the National Investment Bank and sought to make connections between them and individual projects as well to try and increase understanding of different funding mechanisms that might be available to them.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McDowell.
So in terms of private involvement, we've had one project that's been led by the private sector that's now completed in Kilmarnock at Halo. We've one other project which is at Spaceport, which is obviously became unviable. So the market has obviously impacted in both projects. One that we've actually lost. I think in terms of my experience is that these projects are catalysts to get external funding and to work with the private sector and academia. We've found that we've got a significant amount of additional opportunities by working with the universities to get access to other funds that we would not normally as a council have access to, and working with the business sector. So that's really good. We've got one good example of where we have and as part of the growth deal, a £14 million fund, and part of that fund was 11 million was for a subsea cable that we had to redirect that we weren't able to get a viable case to take that one forward. So we've pulled through a change management process, pulled the £14 million together to look at investing that money in our growth deal sites for digital infrastructure. And part of that is working through the procurement framework with Vodafone. So we've got external partners. So for every penny that we're putting into the project, they're going to be not only matching it, but putting in additional opportunity and funding to support the wider area. So there is obviously benefit from there. The catalyst for the external funding in the digital side, the digital economy, we went through the regional economic strategy, created that, but as part of that, there's a theme in terms of digital connectivity. We took that forward and we put a bid into UK government for funding through the digital economy fund, and we were successful ourselves in Glasgow. I think we were the only two in Scotland that benefited from that. That's been a real catalyst for developing a programme with Vodafone, Scotland 5G Centre, external partners. We're working with local businesses, SMEs. We're developing programmes to help support tourism activity, working with Aerospace and the DPMC in Irvine. So there is a huge amount of added benefit that the growth deal acts as a catalyst for and allows us to go for external funding. And that's the way we will go forward, utilising the knowledge, experience of the partners as a whole, Team Ayrshire, to develop an opportunity for getting other funding into the area.
You mentioned in passing the Prestwick Spaceport, which dropped out, and we understand the reasons for that. But what then happens to the funding allocated for that? Does that just drop away? Are you thinking to redeploy that elsewhere?
Yeah.
Can you just explain that? Yeah.
So obviously that whole amount of money that was locked in has been confirmed by the previous government, now the current UK government, that money's there, as well as the Scottish government. So for the funds that will be allocated, there's a change management process going on, which will look to invest in the aerospace sector within Prestwick Airport. So there's ongoing work that's going on, and once we're at a stage where colleagues in South Ayrshire have developed that business case that is effectively getting signed off by both governments, then we'll take that forward. And I think that's probably one of the kind of detrimental parts of the whole process for the public, where you hear that one project's not going ahead. There's a whole process that goes in between, and then they say, where's that money going? Have we lost the money? Is that not coming to Ayrshire? But that has been confirmed that there's another project can evolve out of that.
Okay, thank you. Mr Benning.
So we have Forthport's leading our transport renewables and career exploration hub. We also are developing a Grangemouth sustainable manufacturing campus, with which we will seek to partner with a higher education institute and hopefully some sort of industry there as well, to make that a sustainable and a successful operation. But I would say in the main, it's working with public sector partners who they themselves might seek additional funding from government from different streams to sort of support their projects. But I won't touch on it, but I am keen at some point to talk about the flat spend profile that comes with growth deals. And I think that would be something, if we could touch on at some point, that would be helpful.
Touch on it now if you want.
Okay, right. Well, one of the things that I find, or that we find challenging about the growth deal is that the money that you receive is on a flat, kind of in our case, it will be about £8 million a year. And the problem with that is if you have several projects that are ready to go, but you only have that amount of money, then we're in a situation where that project that I talked about, led by Forth Ports, is ready to go. They're keen, they want to make progress, but we can't fit that project into the spend profile in those early years. And so, in effect, Forth Ports are faced with the choice of either front-loading the spend and hoping that they will get the money back once the full business case is submitted, or sitting and waiting, which isn't good, which isn't what we want in terms of growth for Grangemouth and jobs and all the other things. So I think that, for me, is a challenge, and I would look, as growth deals and the whole process develops, for a greater level of flexibility. Appreciative that we're all facing challenges, and UK and Scottish Government have their own capital pressures, but that is definitely something that is a challenge that we face.
Interesting. All right. Okay, thanks very much. Yeah.
Mr. Farrell, do you want to come back in?
If I could just reflect on Malcolm's final point about the flat profile, that is definitely not the case in the Borderlands. Our profile is what we've put to government, what we put at the outset. We said, this is what we think we're going to spend over 10 years. We're having problems with them because inevitably we haven't spent up to that profile. And the Scottish Government in particular are particularly annoyed with us for this. So they've asked us to reprofile, but they're not trying to apply a flat profile. So our experience is totally different, Malcolm, in the Borderlands. Both governments have been very flexible about the profile. They just want us to actually then meet the profile which we give them.
An issue in itself, I'm sure, Mr. Falconer. And bring in the Deputy Convener.
Yeah, I've just got a few follow-on questions from what we've discussed so far. And I suppose it follows on from that point you're making about the differential structure in these programmes when you reference a flat profile. I just wanted to come back to yourself, Malcolm, again, but it may well be a general question for the rest of the panel as well. How are you able to reflect events, dear boy, if you like? Obviously, I mentioned the refinery at Grangemouth earlier, and that saw the Falkirk growth deal receive extra spend and be rebranded to Falkirk and Grangemouth, 10 million from the Scottish Government and 10 million from the UK Government. But to what extent was that a kind of last-minute bolt-on and response, if you like, as compared to an active planned part of the growth deal?
I think it's probably not for me to talk about the decisions of the UK government's sort of approach there. What I would say is that I think that the dynamic situation at Grangemouth certainly attracts a profile which it's only right that UK and Scottish governments respond to. I personally would say that, in terms of, similar to my starting point, I don't believe there is enough flexibility within the growth deals to deal with the events that you talk about. If I give you a kind of example, I would say that we had two projects in our starting place with the growth deal. One was a carbon dioxide utilisation centre. One was a bioaccelerator pilot plant. And our view was, actually, these two projects would sit well on a shared campus because there would be sort of efficiencies of scale and efficiencies of sort of talent being on the same place. But to achieve that, we had to go through a bureaucratic change process to take two projects to become one project on a shared campus. But we weren't changing the aspirations of either project, and we weren't changing the spend profile of either project. It was just literally about two projects to one campus. So hopefully that just gives you that sense of something that doesn't feel that difficult isn't very fleet of foot. So no, I don't think we are best placed to deal with those events. And as I've said, whilst we've had discussions about, OK, you normally get an £8 million allocation, we could maybe take it to 10 or 11 that year. It's certainly not the case that we could have said, can we have 20 in year 1, 10 in year 2, and then a sort of shallower profile. It was said to us that we had to largely stay within the bounds of a flat profile.
I suppose you highlight the upside of being able to utilise the shared learning around a PMO. The downside of that is the change management processes that come with it. I just picking up a point my colleague Kevin made earlier when you used the term GVA, and I'm not going to have another go at you, but I just wanted to kind of reflect on the fact that with the announcement from PetroChina that the figures we have in terms of jobs impact at the moment is over 400 direct jobs, and you know the Scottish Government references nearly 3,000 jobs and wider impact. So that surprises me in terms of the 10 million from the Scottish Government for greener Grangemouth, which in essence, and you can confirm if I'm wrong in that, is about increasing community well-being rather than specifically seeking to replace jobs, because it was referencing the supply chain, some of which were SMEs providing hamburgers and so on nearby. I just wondered what were your thoughts about the decision-making processes that led to that and led to focus on community and well-being rather than jobs, which was what point Kevin was making.
My reflection would be that the Greener Grangemouth funding was part of the original package that was announced in 2020 and not in any sort of direct relation to events in Grangemouth this year. So the two are not linked. The additional money that did emerge this year was the £10 million that came from the UK government, which at this time is largely unspecified and at the leadership of the UK government rather than ourselves.
So again, just to play back so that I'm clear for the record, the projects that were specifically for Grangemouth were already in train, and that's the Scottish Government's 10 million is going to that. The remaining 10 million of the 20 million extra funds because of the closure of the refinery, that's in the hands of the UK Government for future energy-related projects, and we don't yet know what they are.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, rest of the panel. I suspect this has been a bit Falkirk-specific, but I hope you'll forgive me, given my vested interest. Thank you, Convener.
Don't worry, we're going to get some borderland-specific questions from me very soon, I'm sure. Can I bring in, and speaking of specific questions about local area, can I bring in Willie Coffey, who I'm sure may have a question or two about Ayrshire?
Yeah, exactly, Convener. Thank you very much. The focus is now firmly on Ayrshire, and my colleague Dave McDowell's there. But I think the questions really could be answered by any of the colleagues around the table. But firstly, David, could I just remind you of the broad aims, the Ayrshire Growth deal, the funding package, public funding £250 million, the hope to lever in £300 million of private sector investment and to create 7,000 jobs. Those were the stated objectives around about 4 years ago. How far down that road would you say we are?
We do obviously an annual report, and that annual report is publicly available, and it sets out the ambition. I've got that in front of me here, so I can maybe refer to it. But the kind of key things are, I would say, that in terms of progress, presently, we are probably delayed in the capital project side, as I mentioned that earlier. Revenue projects are well advanced in delivering and have proven to be successful. So we've all, out of the 250 million, we've got 26.4 million committed. So we're significantly down in terms of overall spend, but that will be ramped up as we go into the last 5.5 years of the deal. That's the delays, as obviously as we've heard about getting projects, capital projects from inception right through the whole process, and in some cases delayed due to things like land acquisition. People who have land realise that there's a big premium on the land when they realise that there's a growth deal site going on there. So there's a lot of negotiation that has to go through that. So we've got today about £17 million private sector investment. We've got 16.3 from UK and Scottish Government. So, for instance, in some of the revenue projects, we're targeting 4,100 people that have been actually supported through Working for a Healthy Economy. We've dealt with and supported more than nearly 1,200 different businesses through the Community Wealth Building Programme. So there's quite an achievement there. Are we going to achieve that? I think as we move through the benefits realisation proposal, we will do an analysis on an annual basis and identify through that the actual benefits realised. I can give you an example in Kilmarnock where we have had to, because of the difficulty we've had with investment through Transport Scotland, with the Belfield Interchange. We originally had the Belfield Interchange as part of the connectivity projects, part of the growth deal. We were advised that that should be taken through STPR2, the Regional Transport Assessment, where we found that was unsuccessful. We then applied for Levelling Up Fund funding for the site for a £15 million project to sort out the road safety matters that would help to enable further economic development and opportunities within the area of Kilmarnock, which was within the local development plan, and unfortunately we were unsuccessful with that. So that's been a difficult one, and we will continue to work with Transport Scotland to try and find a solution in that. But taking it back to the investment, that project that came from the site at Belfield over to Moorfield in Kilmarnock has allowed us to enlarge that site, and in doing so we'll have additional inward investment which wasn't originally envisaged. So there'll be businesses coming into the area which will be part of the overall key achievements, which we haven't factored in as yet, and we will only factor that in when we've literally got those premises that are ready to open for on the Moorfield site.
Thanks for that, David. I mean, it's a tall order, isn't it, to try to reach the creation of something like 7,000 jobs, but it has been stated, so we'll all be held to account on that. But the benefit that you described there in providing skills and work opportunity for 4,000, that has to be part of that, which it would never have happened had it not been for the growth deal investment making it possible. So I presume we'll judge that in the round, that would be part of that overall.
I think it's fair to say that we would not have delivered the level of partnership. I mentioned Team Ayrshire, but collectively through the PMO, looking at how to work with partners to take projects forward, and indeed to work with other external companies that would not probably have came and visited and worked with us. But I've mentioned Vodafone, that's one where through the Procurement Scotland we have got a good relationship with, and will deliver on that site and will provide added benefit. And that's the key thing, that they're creating infrastructure that allows us to develop inward investment. And a site like where there's economic infrastructure, these are sites which are, if you build a building and then sell it, you'll lose money. And that's why the private sector don't do it. And that's why we have to do it through the growth deal.
In terms of flexibility and adapting to change, and how easy that is for not only for Ayrshire but the other growth deals too, have you found that quite difficult? I mean, Murdo mentioned the Spaceport project, which presumably went through the same rigorous business case process, but has then been dropped. You mentioned the subsea cable project. So how easy or difficult is it for the growth deals to adapt to changing circumstances and to perhaps repurpose, if not just the funding, but some of the concepts and the vision around some of those projects that are no longer viable?
So I mentioned the development at Belfield Interchange. I put a stop to that in that location about the 31st of March last year, and we're now in a position where we went through about a year later through the change management process. So it's not quick. It does mean that we have to jump through a lot of hoops, and as you heard earlier on, that means that we have to make sure that we can demonstrate that that location is right for delivery of that economic benefit. There's other deals that have a much more streamlined approach, we believe, and there's opportunity with anything like this to look at best practice, other deals, how we can make this much more efficient. Because the reality is that, you know, we could be spending money just now if we were given the green light. And it was mentioned earlier about a level of trust. We have a level of trust through Section 95 officers for all other finances, including shared prosperity, no one left behind, and a whole range of other types of external funding that comes in through both governments. And I think it would be helpful if we were given that level of trust in these particular projects.
Okay. And my last question for you, Dave, is how well do you think the Ayrshire Growth Deal interacts with, or otherwise, with neighbouring growth deals? I'm thinking about Glasgow City. I'm thinking about their Clyde Metro project, their mass transport issues and so on. And I'm also thinking about Borderlands and South of Scotland Enterprise and regional funding that they get. Have we been able to link in with some of the work that they're doing to try and deliver a wee bit of additional benefit for Ayrshire?
So through the PMO network, you heard that's there and is up and running and delivers a lot of real intelligence. We're fortunate that we subcontract the economic modelling to the Glasgow Intelligence Hub, so we do learn from them. In terms of projects that, and another example is the Food and Drink Centre of Excellence, where we'll have a whole range of incubator units, a centre where businesses are developed, you know, from first-time businesses right through to the multinationals. So there is an opportunity that doesn't exist anywhere in the west of Scotland presently. So there is an opportunity that we work with the regions to bring that inward investment to the local area.
And what about the kind of transport infrastructure side of it with Clyde Metro? Do you see any opportunities for us in Ayrshire to improve our offer for our citizens in terms of getting our citizens who prefer to work, say, in the Glasgow area to get there faster, quicker, smarter, parking rides, all of that stuff? Does that fit in the interface with Clyde Metro?
There is obviously, we do that through the local development plan process where we look at areas such as parking ride, but I mean, probably for me, it was mentioned earlier about is getting more local jobs and more people staying within Ayrshire. I think that's one of the kind of key factors that we've certainly been working to. I mentioned there about some of the connectivity issues that we have in some of the, you know, between M77, A77, A76 and at the Belfield Interchange, and that's something that we do need not only political support, but we need officer support from Transport Scotland and the requisite funding to make, you know, that economic argument that we can get more people working successfully in the local area.
Thanks very much for that, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Willie. You've all mentioned the fact that this is a pretty lengthy process. I mean, I recall being a councillor 10 years ago, chairing meetings of what was called the Borderlands Initiative at the time, and that was in Carlisle City Council chamber, and Carlisle City Council doesn't even exist anymore. I mean, it was so long ago. I mean, is the process too slow? I mean, could these projects not simply have been delivered through traditional methods of direct funding to local authorities to deliver them? Did we need these growth deals at all, given how lengthy the process actually is? That's a straightforward question to end with, I suspect, but I don't know if anybody has an opinion on that. Why do we need growth deals? Why can we not just use traditional methods of funding? David, you had your hand
well,
up there.
I think the answer is yes, we do need the money. This is additional funding to normal funding routes.
If the funding was available, but it's the mechanism. Did we need the growth deal mechanism? What's the advantages of actually having this mechanism and not just simply saying, well, East Ayrshire Council deliver a project in Kilmarnock?
I think the key thing there is it would be issued to a council as opposed to a region, and I think there's more added benefit if you can deliver that to a region and pull resources from all the various partners, and the funding to the region is key. I think there's ways to streamline that process. You know, understand Glasgow City have a different, you know, process in how they deliver their growth deal projects. So I think it's always good to learn from others, but I think it's fundamental as we take forward the regional economic strategy that strategy has additional funding that can help to support some of the kind of key sectors in the area, and in doing so allow us to work with those sectors to see what is the maximum benefit that we can use that money for.
So just on that point, I'll bring others in to talk specifically. You mentioned the Regional Economic Partnership. Do you therefore see that what's next for growth deals, if you like? Your priority is to deliver these projects over the next few years, but what's next? Is this a new form of regional economic governance that we should have? Is a Regional Economic Partnership, for example, in Ayrshire, is that going to be the forum in the future after you've delivered these projects? I mean, what are the growth deals? What do we need to do next when it comes to economic delivery that we've learnt from the growth deals?
I think we would utilise the infrastructure that's there now through the Regional Economic Partnership, and the strategy that underpins that is a key document, and that drives forward the various different funds that we get and how those funds are maximised. And in simplest terms, the Ayrshire Growth Deals is a pot of money that comes to the region and we deliver projects on. It's no different to UK Shared Prosperity or you know, some of the other funds that we've got. So I think it's key
to local authorities. Do you think that in future, after the growth deals are being and gone, that those regional economic forums should be directly funded to deliver regional projects, or is it?
I think personally, I think that's the way it'll go.
Okay, that's interesting. Mr. Farrell, you had your hand up there. You won't be able to just have the regional economic forums that we have in Scotland, because obviously in the borderlands, the regional economic forum in Dumfries and Galloway and Borders, but obviously you've got the unique. I wouldn't say bad bag. I would say very good bag of also having local authorities that cut right across the border. Where do you see the borderlands growing or going in the future? Given the fact that it is that unique partnership that cuts across the two borders.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Coming back to the original question first, could we have done this just with individual project support? 5 different local authorities applying for 5 different grants for their own pet projects, so to speak. We would have lost the synergy that actually coming together as a Borderlands Partnership has produced. Certain projects need to be of a certain scale, and that can only be done across some of the partners in the Borderlands Partnership. We faced similar challenges of rurality, a major Scottish issue anyway, but rurality, low working age populations, etc. And some of the solutions that we've come up with, such as the Hadrian's Wall project, spans 3 authority areas, will get benefit from it. So it's horses for courses. A lot of projects could have just been done on an individual basis. Some needed the growth deal to be able to be brought forward and funded in the economic climate which we're in. Turning to governance, you're right, we don't have those regional economic forums. In Northumberland, there's the mayoral combined authority for Northumberland, Tyne and Wear. That has a large pot of money, and that seems to be the way forward on the English side of the border. On the Cumbrian side of the Pennines, I understand that they're looking at the potential for a mayoral combined authority. Whether that will happen or not, I don't know. If not, they'll continue with their existing local enterprise partnership arrangements, which they have. The growth deal, to me, will always be a pot that whichever partnership is existing can actually bid into or develop a deal to bid against. And if we just look at the experience of Greater Manchester Authority, I think they're onto something like their 4th deal with government, because they've demonstrated the benefit. I think all our deals, it's far too early to say, well, we want a deal too, because we don't have the track record of contributing to either government's objectives at the moment.
you'll be pleased to know that last week's panel did say they wanted a growth deal too, but they're a bit further ahead. But so where do you see the future of Borderlands, and do you see that as a mechanism that will continue beyond the growth deal once you've delivered these projects? I mean, it brings those 5 local authorities together, 1 million people, quite a bit of clout there. Do you see that there is a future for the Borderlands that goes beyond simply delivering the projects and the growth deal?
I would like to think so. It's a very difficult geography, and I don't just mean on the map, because there is the 2 countries and the different structures, governance structures which the authorities have. But we do face common problems, and I would hope it would continue as a partnership if there isn't a second deal, addressing some of those problems and developing solutions for some of those problems, because we don't want to be in competition with one another. We want to work with partners across what is in many ways an artificial, even though it's a very real border. And I can't see why they can't act in partnership on certain issues. So I would see that partnership continuing, but that's for the politicians to decide, convener. That's not for me.
Okay, well, I have my view on that, but I'm not allowed to share it just now. I'll bring in Anne. I suppose on those 2 points, Anne, I mean, first of all, could you have delivered these projects without the need for a growth deal? Did we need a growth deal? And where do you see the partnership that you've created up in the Highlands and Islands going in the future?
Thank you, Convener. So I think there's definitely been benefits of being part of the growth deal. So yes, we could have, as 3 island authorities, received funding for specific projects, but there has been added value as a result of the 3 councils working collaboratively through the growth deal. And we're seeing, I mean, that work had begun previously in terms of Our Islands, Our Future, but we do see now many areas where the islands work well together on, as you mentioned, kind of we do have common issues and common concerns that we're taking forward. We're working well together on areas such as the visitor levy, energy costs and things like that that are out with the deal, but I think represent that wider partnership that we have in place. For projects in the deal, it's been good, I think, to be part of that longer-term programme. So there's been advantages to being in the deal. So again, I think the growth deal has the benefits of being able, a 10-year funding package is very unusual. So that's been definitely advantageous. I think the challenges really around the process and the mechanism for us to be able to draw down that funding, and that's where being part of the growth deal is proving to be challenging. So I think the concept is good, the governance, to having that kind of coming together around the deal is good, but the bureaucracy and the process is what's proving to be quite challenging for us.
That's a well-made point. It was a point that was also raised last week. I suppose the final word to yourself, Mr. Benny. You've got 1 local authority. Could this not just have been delivered by Funding Falkirk Council to deliver these projects?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. My initial thoughts were, if that had happened, would we necessarily have brought in the partners that we've brought in? So, for example, Scottish Canals are building Scotland Canal Centre in Falkirk. Forth Valley College is, taking forward a training hub. I probably would say we could have done those things, but there would have needed to have been a framework that encouraged that sort of participation of other bodies. I would also make the point that there's other schemes that we are working with, like the Levelling Up Fund and the Forth Green Freeport, and we've not seen that same level of bureaucracy attached to the kind of funding arrangements that we've got for those organisations. So it does strike me that if maybe the growth deal was treated in the same way, then maybe the benefits that colleagues have talked about that partnership, that regional working that you do definitely get massive benefit from, would have had less of the drawback of the bureaucracy and the administration. Because I personally feel like 5 years between a strategic outline case to a deal being signed, that isn't the speed that we would want to go with. And I would probably make the final point that I'm sure myself and other colleagues are semi-responsible for some quite large capital budgets at all our local authorities, and within those budgets, there is an element of flexibility within the governance arrangements that we have within local government, but those same abilities are not afforded to this scheme. So that ability to maybe move a little bit of money from that project to both reach decent outcomes isn't afforded to us. We have to go through that change process, which, again, I don't think is fleet of foot.
Okay, that's good. Well, thank you very much indeed to our panel. That brings us to the end of our evidence session. Thank you so much for your evidence. It's been incredibly useful, and as you're aware, we'll produce a report over the next few months, and I'm sure lots of comments you've made today will feature heavily in those reports. So thank you for your attendance, and we'll now move into a private session.